welcome back to the third hour of our program. Wow, there is a lot going on in the world today. And but the Supreme Court, I think, is at the core of many of the problems that this country is facing, frankly, including their doctrine that money is speech and therefore, billionaires can own politicians. But, most grating, I think, to most Americans is this Dobbs decision, which is just bizarre. 3 women showed up last week at the Supreme Court to protest this and actually interrupted the proceedings to the point that the Supreme Court cut off the live feed, and at least one of them, Emily Patterson, ended up in jail overnight. Emily is on the line with us right now. ULTY Girl is Emily's Twitter handle. I just retweeted a story about her, picture of her. Emily, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks for having me here.
So tell us what you guys did and how this came together. What motivated you to do this?
So first of all, I've never done anything like this. I've never participated in an act of civil disobedience. I'm a CEO and a soccer mom, and my husband's a retired military officer. So that's my background. And over the last couple of years, I've just been watching in horror as our democracy starts to fall apart. And the repeal of Roe versus Wade was just a huge gut punch for me. I felt like women's rights were just being stripped away in front of my eyes. So when a few friends told me about this grassroots effort that was being put together, I thought a long time about it, and I felt like it was something I was compelled to do. There's a long history in our country, the tradition of civil disobedience, peaceful civil disobedience in the civil rights movement. I've always wondered what I would have done during that time period. So I felt like this was my moment, and that we all have a responsibility to protest against unethical rules.
You want to tell it
worked?
Yeah, and you certainly did. You want to tell us about the other 2 women who participated in this and how it came together?
Sure. So one woman, Nikki Enfield, she's also in her 40s like me. She's like me, we both live in the DC suburbs. And the other woman, Roland Baker, is from Arizona, and she's a 71-year-old great-grandmother, and she's disabled. And she came all the way here to, protest for her grandchildren and her great-granddaughter, who's 6 months old.
Wow. So you went into the Supreme Court, and then what?
So they allow 50 members of the public to watch oral arguments. Mm-hmm. So we entered as members of the public. And then once the oral arguments started, first I stood up and I said my piece, and then Roland stood up. They took me out, and then Roland stood up and said her piece, and then Nikki stood up and said her piece.
Well, I wonder if they were sitting there going, "Are there 47 more?" It's like,
yeah.
So what was your piece, Emily? Tell us what you told the court.
I knew we had about 5 seconds to speak, so I stood and I said, "I respectfully rise to denounce Dobbs. Women of America, vote."
Wow.
Those were the 2 messages I was really trying to get across. Was we were here, in the Supreme Court to heartily protest against the repeal of Roe versus Wade, which protect women and people with uteruses. And then, we did this the week before the election because we were really trying to remind American women of what is at stake in this election. The Republicans, Lindsey Graham has already started legislation to enact a nationwide abortion ban. Girls are getting raped in certain states and can't get access to abortion care right now.
Yep. Women
are in certain states are, their fetus might die inside of them as they're pregnant, and they're having trouble getting medical care to get the dead baby out of their body.
Yep.
And my friends who are in the medical world have said it's become really hard for them to, in certain states, to get the care for their patients that they need. It's like it's happening right now.
How does one become one of those 50 observers at the Supreme Court?
There's a schedule online with, public schedule of what the oral arguments will be. And you get there really, really early in the morning and you line up. It's very old school. There's not a lot of technology. You can't reserve a spot.
Oh, interesting. So you just stood in line for hours and hours and hours.
Yeah, I think I arrived at 4:45 in the morning.
Huh. And the court opened what, around 9, 10?
I think at 9 o'clock they handed us they hand you these little cards with your number on them.
Mm-hmm.
I was number 3 in line.
Were you able to see the justices when you stood up and spoke?
I could see them. We waited a few minutes. I waited a few minutes before I stood up, and they had already entered and sat down.
Mm-hmm.
But when I stood up, I was terrified to do this. This was so far out of my comfort zone from what my normal life is. So when I stood up, I sort of had this out of body experience, and I don't think was even looking at anyone. Mm-hmm. Because it was a really scary moment.
It had to be an adrenaline-filled moment. And then after they dragged you out, what happened?
So then I waited in the hallway, and then Roland was taken out, and then Nikki was taken out, and then we were all together. And we were handcuffed behind our backs in front, and took mug shots of us right in front of the tourists who are still waiting to get in. Mm-hmm. And then we were taken to the holding room down in the Supreme Court for about 5 hours while they processed our paperwork.
The Supreme Court has a jail cell in their building?
Oh no, it was more of a conference room.
Okay.
A conference room. And that part was fine. They treated us quite well and respectfully. Mm-hmm. But then later in that day, we were transported to 4 different places. One was the Supreme Court. And after that, our experience started to get much worse. And the worst part was they took us to a DC cell block overnight, mm-hmm. where the cells, I can only describe them as like dog kennels. They were 4x6 cells, 90 degrees with like an industrial fan blowing. It felt like something from an Avengers movie or something. Mm-hmm. There were blood stains on the walls of the cell. We were never given our phone call or food, like very little food, very little water. We would ask for water because it was so hot, and they would just ignore us. And our 71-year-old friend, Nikki, and I were kept together, and she was across the corridor in another cell. Mm-hmm. She was really suffering. She can barely walk. She walks with a cane, and they denied her medical care. It was really bad.
Wow. Which police agency was doing this? I don't know who polices the Supreme Court. Is that the Capitol Police, or was it the DC?
So the first people we interacted with were at the Supreme Court, and they were Supreme Court officers, mm-hmm. and they were very respectful. And then we were put into the DC metropolitan system.
Right. And then the next morning you got bailed out? Is that how it worked?
Around noon, we were taken in the back of this. They put you in these like little prisoner vans where mm-hmm. It's sort of a coffin-like experience. You have your hands handcuffed behind your back, and they shove you into this tiny metal bench in the back of a prison transport van where mm-hmm. it's like a coffin. It's so dark. They shut the door and it's dark. It's really, really hot. And we were put in with other criminals that they'd picked up or other people that had been accused of crimes. Mm-hmm. And so that's how we were transported all of the 4 times, including our disabled elderly friend was put in that situation.
Right.
So we were taken after the DC cell block. We were taken to the federal court, where we were held in the transport vehicle again for about 45 minutes in the dark. You never know really like what's happening or how long they're going to keep you there. Mm-hmm. Then we were let into the federal prison, and they put us in leg irons, including our disabled friend who can barely walk with a cane. Mm-hmm. And then we sat in there for a while, and then finally we were allowed to see the lawyer, our lawyer. Mm-hmm. And to see the lawyer, we had the leg chains, and they put waist chains on us, and they shackled our hands to our waist.
Wow.
Our lawyers asked if
You're dangerous.
I know, yeah, for saying 10 words.
Yeah.
The lawyers asked if we could be unshackled so we could sign our paperwork, and the guards said no. And then we were finally able to go up into the courtroom and see the judge and get released.
Yeah, remarkable.
So the whole thing took from our arrest to when we were released was about 30 hours.
We're talking with Emily Patterson. She, a soccer mom and CEO who decided to stand up to the Supreme Court along with 2 other women. and speak about this horrible Dobbs decision. Emily, final thoughts, messages for America about your experience and what motivated your experience and your thoughts on the court?
Yeah, I guess the two big messages I want to get out is the first is, like, we all have power to do something. This was so far out of my comfort zone. This is nothing that I'd ever done or thought about. But we all have power, and we need to exercise that power. Peaceful protest is an important part of American history. Nothing has ever changed without it.
Yep.
And our democracy is in peril right now. Our rights are being stripped away. And please, please, please vote. Please vote for Democrats. I don't care what your political beliefs are. Right now, the only party that is acting in a democratic way and believes in democratic norms is the Democratic Party. So we all need to band together. We can be a spectrum of different beliefs, but we need to vote.
There you go. Emily Patterson. Emily, thank you so much for dropping by today.